Elizabeth Carter set the dead woman's music box on Nathaniel Whitmore's dining table, looked the richest man in Virginia straight in the eye and curtsied. Not because she was sorry, not because she was afraid, because she had just been told in front of 18 guests, in front of the child she loved like her own, that she was nothing more than hired help who had forgotten her place. And a curtsy was the only thing she could give him that he didn't deserve. She walked out. She didn't look back. And Nathaniel Whitmore stood in his grand dining hall and felt for the first time in his life like the poorest man in the room. If you've ever been told you don't belong in a place, you gave everything to stay with me. Subscribe to this channel, follow this story all the way to the end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Elizabeth Carter arrived at Whitmore Estate on a February morning with a trunk $12 and a letter of recommendation. She'd read so many times she'd memorized every word, not because she was proud of it, but because some nights it was the only thing she had that proved she was worth something to somebody. She was 26 years old. Her father was 8 months dead. He'd left behind his books, his pipe, his good name, and $400 in debt to a creditor in Richmond who had already sent 2 letters. Both of them polite in the way that letters are polite when the person writing them has every legal right to be impolite and is simply choosing not to be, yet. She had no mother living, no brothers, no husband, no one who would miss her if she failed at this except herself, and she had learned early that self-pity was a luxury she couldn't afford. So she got off the wagon, picked up her trunk, straightened her dress, and walked to the front door of the largest private residence she had ever stood in front of in her life. She did not let herself be impressed by it. She could not afford that either. The housekeeper who met her was a woman named Mrs. Booth, short, capable, with the kind of face that had decided a long time ago not to waste energy on expressions that weren't necessary. She looked Elizabeth up and down once, not unkindly, more the way a person looks at a tool they're not sure will hold up under real use. "You're younger than I expected," Mrs. Booth said. "I'm older than I look," Elizabeth said. Mrs. Booth almost smiled. "Come in then. I'll take you up to meet Miss Charlotte before Mr. Whitmore gets back. Better that way." "Better," Elizabeth said, following her inside. "He doesn't like disruptions to his morning," Mrs. Booth said, which Elizabeth understood immediately to mean he doesn't like people. "Understood," she said. "You'll need to be patient with Charlotte," Mrs. Booth said as they climbed the staircase. "She don't talk much, don't cry much neither, which is worse if you ask me. A child who don't cry has already learned that crying don't help." Elizabeth said nothing. She filed that away. "She's in the East Room. She likes the window." "What does she look at?" Elizabeth asked. Mrs. Booth stopped on the landing and looked at her. "Beg pardon. Out the window," Elizabeth said. "What does she look at?" Mrs. Booth was quiet a moment. "The creek, mostly." "Why?" "I like to know what a child pays attention to," Elizabeth said. "It tells you what matters to her before she's ready to tell you herself." Mrs. Booth looked at her for another long second. Then she said, "You'll do," and kept walking. Charlotte Whitmore was sitting in the window seat of the East Room when Elizabeth came in, and she did not look up. She was 8 years old, and small for it, with dark hair, and her uncle's same gray eyes, and she was holding a rosewood music box in both hands, the way children hold things they know are breakable close to the chest. Careful, like the holding itself is a kind of prayer. Elizabeth stopped just inside the door. She did not introduce herself. She did not say, "You must be Charlotte," or "What a lovely room," or any of the other things that adults said to children when they were nervous and filling silence. She waited. Charlotte did not look up for a full minute. Then she said, still looking out the window, "You're the new governess." "Yes," Elizabeth said. "The last one cried on her 3rd day and left on her 4th. "What did she cry about?" Charlotte finally looked at her. Something moved in those gray eyes, surprise maybe. Or just the recalibration of a child who had expected a different kind of answer. "Uncle Nathaniel spoke sharply to her at dinner," Charlotte said. "Did she deserve it?" "No," Charlotte said. "But she was afraid of him." "Are you afraid of him?" Elizabeth asked. Charlotte considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "No," she said finally. "But I think he's afraid of himself. That's different." Elizabeth looked at this child. This small, careful, heartbroken child, who had just said something that most grown adults never manage to figure out about themselves, and she made a decision. She crossed the room. She sat down on the window seat across from Charlotte, not next to her, because you didn't crowd a child who was still deciding whether to trust you. "I'm Miss Carter," she said. "I'm going to be here a while, and I'm not going to cry." Charlotte looked at her steadily. "How do you know?" "Because," Elizabeth said, "I've been spoken sharply to before, by people with a great deal more practice at it than your uncle." The ghost of something crossed Charlotte's face. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was the shape of one. "What's in the music box?" Elizabeth asked. Charlotte's hands tightened around it. "A waltz. My mama's waltz." She paused. "It doesn't play anymore." "How long has it been broken?" "Since November. 4 months." The child had been winding a silent box every morning for 4 months because she did not know how to stop. "May I look at it?" Elizabeth asked. Charlotte hesitated. Then she held it out. Elizabeth took it carefully. She turned it over. She opened the base, examined the mechanism, pressed 2 fingers gently against the spring drum, and handed it back. "I can't promise I can fix it," she said. "But I can try." Charlotte held it against her chest again. "The last governess said she'd try to make me feel better. She didn't." "I didn't say I'd make you feel better," Elizabeth said. "I said I'd try to fix the music box. Those are 2 different things." Charlotte looked at her. "Fixing the music box would make me feel better," Charlotte said very precisely. "I know," Elizabeth said. "That's why I offered." She fixed it on a Thursday. It took her 3 evenings, her own evenings, after Charlotte was asleep, working at the kitchen table with a sewing needle, her father's small pocket knife, and the kind of stubborn patience that had no name except not giving up. Mrs. Booth set a lamp beside her the first night without being asked, and didn't say anything about it. On the second night, she set a cup of tea beside the lamp. On the third night, when the mechanism finally caught, and the music box played 43 seconds of a waltz, thin and sweet, in the quiet kitchen, Mrs. Booth, who was kneading bread dough at the far end of the table, stopped kneading. Neither of them spoke. Elizabeth wound it again. 43 seconds of Clara Whitmore's waltz playing in the dark. "You'd best let the child wind it herself in the morning," Mrs. Booth said, finally, her voice a little rough. "It'll mean more." "I know," Elizabeth said. She set the music box on the kitchen table and went to bed. The next morning, she brought it to Charlotte before breakfast and placed it in the child's hands, without any ceremony, without any speech, without any expectation of gratitude. Charlotte wound the key. The waltz played, and Charlotte pressed both hands over her mouth and stood absolutely still for almost a full minute. Then she sat down on the floor, right where she was just sat down on the schoolroom floor, in her good morning dress, and listened to it until it stopped. Elizabeth sat down beside her. They sat on the floor together until the waltz ran out. Charlotte did not cry, but she leaned very slightly into Elizabeth's shoulder. Elizabeth kept still and let her stay there. Nathaniel Whitmore was told about the music box by his estate manager, Pharaoh, who had heard about it from a stable hand, who had heard about it from one of the kitchen girls. This was not how Nathaniel preferred to receive information about his household. He preferred reports. He preferred documented facts and clear summaries. He did not prefer the organic gossip chain by which domestic information traveled through most of Virginia. But the information reached him regardless. Howe was in his study reviewing accounts when Pharaoh mentioned it casually in passing at the end of a Friday meeting, and Nathaniel said nothing for a moment. "She repaired it herself," he said. 3 evenings, used her own time, Pharaoh said. "Mrs. Booth says she didn't ask permission or compensation, just did it." Nathaniel looked at his account books. "Charlotte," he said. "How is she?" Pharaoh paused not long, but Nathaniel noticed it. Pharaoh was a man of 40 years in estate management, and he had a very good blank face which he was currently using. "Improved, sir," Pharaoh said carefully. "Considerably." Nathaniel nodded once. He returned to his accounts. But after Pharaoh left, he did not immediately look back at the numbers. He sat at his desk in the quiet of his study, and he thought about Charlotte winding a broken music box every morning for 4 months because she did not know how to stop. He had known about the music box. He had known it was broken. He had known Charlotte kept it on the windowsill. It had not occurred to him to fix it. The thought arrived quietly without fanfare and sat in him like a stone in still water. It had not occurred to him. He started noticing things he hadn't noticed before. Not deliberately. He did not set out to observe Elizabeth Carter. He was a man who prided himself on the systematic management of his attention and a governess. Even an effective one did not fall within the scope of what required his attention. But she was difficult not to notice, not because of anything she did wrong, because of what she did differently. He came back from his morning ride one Tuesday to find her and Charlotte in the front hallway, not the schoolroom. The hallway, lying flat on their stomachs on the polished floor, both of them looking at something Elizabeth was holding at eye level. He stopped. "What are you doing?" he asked. Neither of them startled. Elizabeth looked up at him with the same composed expression she always wore, not quite a smile, not quite neutral. Something in between that he had never fully been able to read. "There's a beetle," Charlotte said very seriously. "Miss Carter says it's a stag beetle. She's showing me the mandibles." "On my hallway floor," Nathaniel said. "He came in under the east door," Elizabeth said. "We're going to take him back outside. We wanted to look at him first." She paused. "Would you like to see? The mandibles are quite remarkable." He looked at them both, his governess and his niece, flat on the floor of his front hall, like two people who had never heard that there was a dignified way to behave in a house like this. He said, "No." He walked past them to the stairs. Behind him he heard Charlotte say very quietly, "He looked, though." And Elizabeth say even more quiet, "I noticed." He did not slow his step, but he had looked. She was right about that. The second time he was coming down the back corridor at dusk and heard voices from the library. The small library, not the main one. The room he never used because it had been his brother Robert's room first, and it still felt that way. He should have kept walking. He stopped. Through the half-open door, he could hear Elizabeth reading aloud. Not a school book. A real... He recognized the cadence of it, the rhythm, the way a story moved when someone was reading it, because they loved it, and not because it was assigned. He heard Charlotte say, "Did she really cross by herself?" "By herself," Elizabeth said. With no map and no guide and nothing except the direction her husband had gone, and the belief that love was worth more than sense. "Was it?" Charlotte said. "Worth more than sense." Silence for a moment. "In her case," Elizabeth said, "it turned out to be the most sensible thing she ever did. But you don't know that when you start. That's the part nobody tells you. You don't know it until you're already on the other side." A pause. "Miss Carter," Charlotte said, "did you ever love someone like that?" "I loved my father like that," Elizabeth said. "And my mother, though she's been gone a long while." "I loved my mama like that," Charlotte said. "And Papa, even though Papa was..." She stopped. "I know," Elizabeth said, gentle and without flinching. "You can say it. Even though Papa was broken at the end." Very quietly. "Yes." "That doesn't change that he loved you," Elizabeth said. "Broken people love fiercely, Charlotte. Sometimes more fiercely than anyone. It just comes out sideways, and it hurts the people nearest to them. That's not your fault. It was never your fault." Silence. Nathaniel stood in this corridor with one hand against the wall and did not move. He stood there for a long time after the voices inside had gone quiet. Then he went upstairs. He did not sleep that night. He lay in the dark and thought about broken people who loved fiercely and sideways. He thought about his brother Robert, who had been the kind of man who felt everything too much and managed none of it, who had drunk himself to death inside a year because Clara was gone, and he did not know how to be in a world without her. He thought about himself, who had felt nothing at all for so long that he had started to believe that was simply what he was. He thought about Charlotte winding a broken music box. He thought about a woman lying on the floor of his front hallway, looking at a beetle's mandibles and saying, "Would you like to see?" He was 35 years old. He had built the most efficient estate in Virginia. He had never once sat on the floor beside a child. The thought did not sit comfortably. He didn't try to make it. He began to change in ways that were small enough that he could pretend they weren't changes at all. He started taking dinner at the main table instead of his study. The first night he did this, Charlotte looked at his chair when he sat down with an expression of such complete surprise that he felt obscurely ashamed of himself. "Good evening, Charlotte," he said. Charlotte said, "Good evening, Uncle Nathaniel," very carefully, like she was testing whether it was real. He asked her what she'd studied that day. She blinked. Then she told him. About the stag beetle. About the proper name for the mandibles. About the French word for summer, which was été, which she found beautiful because it sounded like a sigh. He listened. He didn't know how to respond to most of it, but he listened, and that was enough. She was still talking when the soup arrived. He let her talk. 3 weeks before the dinner party, Margaret Caldwell arrived. She did not send a note. She never did. Margaret Caldwell operated on the principle that announcing yourself gave the other person time to prepare, which gave them an advantage she saw no reason to extend. Nathaniel met her in the parlor. "You look tired," she said by way of greeting. "You look early," he said. She sat down and arranged her skirts with the deliberate ease of a woman who had long ago decided she would be comfortable anywhere she sat. "Cecilia sends her love. She's in Fredericksburg." "And you're here," he said, "without her. Which should tell you something." He waited. Margaret looked at him with the particular attention she reserved for conversations she considered important. "There's talk," she said, "about the governess." Nathaniel said nothing. "Nothing scandalous," Margaret said, in the tone of someone who understood perfectly well that nothing scandalous was itself a provocation. "Just noticed. She's noticed. The way she manages the household. The way Charlotte has come around. The way you've—" she paused. "Changed your dinner arrangements." Charlotte needed company at dinner. "Of course she did," Margaret said pleasantly. "And it was right to provide it. But the talk, Nathaniel, a man of your standing, and a woman of her position. She's a governess." "Exactly," Margaret said. "She is. And it would do everyone a great deal of good if she remembered it." She smiled. "I'm going to suggest you host a dinner. The Beaumonts have been asking. The Prestons. It would settle things, establish the proper picture. Your house, your guests, your household in its correct order." He looked at her. Margaret's smile didn't waver. 3 weeks, she said. "I'll help with the arrangements." He should have said no. He already knew, sitting in that chair, that he should say no. "Fine," he said. 3 weeks. Margaret stood satisfied and said she'd see herself out. She was halfway to the door when she turned back. "Nathaniel," she said, "I say this as a friend. The woman is capable. She's done well by Charlotte. But capable is not the same as equal. Don't let kindness confuse you about what she is." He said nothing. She left. He sat in the empty parlor for a long time after she'd gone, looking at the door she'd walked out of, and the discomfort in his chest had a shape he didn't try to name. The night of the dinner. Elizabeth dressed Charlotte in her best blue dress and brought her downstairs for the greeting which was customary. The guests arrived in the early evening. The Beaumonts, the Fairfaxes, the Hardings, the Prestons, the full parade of Virginia society in its summer finery, and Charlotte stood in the hall with Elizabeth's hand and accepted introductions with the gravity of a child twice her age. It was Mrs. Harding who changed the evening. She was a round, warm woman of 60, who before anyone had spoken a word to her in the entryway had knelt down to put herself at the level of the estate's old hound dog and was talking to it with complete unself-consciousness. Charlotte watched this. "He only likes nice people," Charlotte told Elizabeth in a whisper. "He's a good judge then," Elizabeth said. Mrs. Harding stood, noticed Charlotte, and crossed to them immediately. "You must be Miss Whitmore," she said. "I've been told you play the piano." 3 pieces, Charlotte confirmed. "Miss Carter taught me." Mrs. Harding looked up at Elizabeth. "Well, she must be a fine teacher." "She's the best," Charlotte said. No hesitation. No qualification. The way children tell the truth when they haven't yet learned to be careful with it. Then she turned and ran to the side table before Elizabeth could stop her and came back with the music box. Elizabeth said low and gentle, "Charlotte, sweetheart." "Mrs. Harding lost her husband too," Charlotte said with complete 8-year-old logic. She should hear it. Mrs. Harding looked at Elizabeth. Elizabeth looked at Mrs. Harding. Something passed between them, one woman to another, over the head of a grieving child, who was doing the only thing she knew how to do when she recognized someone else's pain. "Let her," Mrs. Harding said quietly. Charlotte wound the key. The waltz played. The room around them had gone still. In the way rooms go still when something real is happening, and everyone knows it. Elizabeth was aware of the guests. Aware of the watching eyes, the suspended conversations. Aware of Cecilia Caldwell in pale yellow near the far window. Aware of Margaret Caldwell's gaze from across the room, precise and unreadable. And aware without looking directly of Nathaniel, standing near the fireplace, watching. Mrs. Harding clasped her hands when the music ended. Her eyes were bright. "That is the loveliest thing I've heard all summer," she said. "Mama used to wind it every morning," Charlotte said. "Now I do." "Then you're keeping something beautiful alive," Mrs. Harding said. "That's no small thing." Elizabeth touched Charlotte's shoulder. "Curtsy and say good night, love. You've done beautifully." Charlotte curtsied perfectly, completely, with every bit of the dignity she'd been practicing for weeks. "It was very nice to meet you, Mrs. Harding," she said. Mrs. Harding caught Elizabeth's hand as they turned. "You've done a remarkable job with her," she said quietly. "She's a remarkable child." "She did it herself," Elizabeth said. "I just kept her company." She took Charlotte's hand. She turned for the stairs. She was 3 steps from the door. "Miss Carter." His voice. Not loud. It didn't need to be. The room was already listening. She stopped. Turned. Nathaniel stood by the fireplace with a glass in his hand and 18 guests at his back, and Margaret Caldwell, just to his left with her eyes on Elizabeth, like a woman watching an experiment she'd already predicted the outcome of. "Charlotte has had her time with the guests," Nathaniel said. His voice was even, controlled, the voice of a man who had made a decision and was executing it before he could reconsider. "It's appropriate you take her upstairs now." Elizabeth held his gaze. "Of course, Mr. Whitmore. We were just—" "And in the future," he said. And something in the room shifted, and in the future the way it shifts when a door closes that you didn't see coming. "I would ask that you remember, the guest's time is not available for extended conversation. The household staff have their role, and our guest's evening should not be interrupted by—" He stopped himself. One beat of silence. He knew what he was doing. She could see it in his face, the flicker behind his eyes that said he knew. He said it anyway, by those outside their station. The room held its breath. Charlotte's hand tightened in Elizabeth's until the small fingers pressed like a vice. Mrs. Harding made a sound that was not quite a word. Elizabeth did not look at Margaret Caldwell. She did not look at the guests or the servants, or the careful watching faces arranged around the most expensive room in Virginia. She looked at Nathaniel. She reached down and took the music box gently, carefully, the way you take something precious from a child when you need them to trust you, from Charlotte's hands. She walked to the long oak side table. She set the music box down in the center of it where the lamplight caught the rosewood and made it shine. She turned back. She curtsied, back straight, head inclined. Exactly the depth and duration that 18 years of proper upbringing required. Not 1 degree more, not 1 degree less. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore," she said in a voice that was perfectly steady and perfectly clear and perfectly quiet, "for reminding me exactly where I stand." Then she took Charlotte's hand. She walked out. She did not look back. She did not hurry. She kept her back straight and her chin level and her step even up the staircase and down the hall and through Charlotte's bedroom door. And when it closed behind them, she sat down on the edge of the bed and pressed both hands flat against her knees and breathed. In the room below, she heard the dinner guests return to their conversations. She heard the sound of a household rearranging itself back into the shape a powerful man required. She heard the silence of a music box that no one had wound. Charlotte climbed up beside her. Those gray eyes, Nathaniel's eyes watching her with an attention that missed nothing. "Miss Carter," Charlotte said. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, sweetheart." "You don't look fine." "I look exactly as fine as I am," Elizabeth said, which wasn't an answer, and they both knew it. Charlotte was quiet a moment. "He looked at you," she said, "after you left, before you were even at the stairs. He looked at where you'd been standing." Elizabeth said nothing. "And he put his glass down," Charlotte said. "He didn't pick it up again." "Charlotte," Elizabeth said very gently, "it's time for supper." "Miss Carter." "Supper," Elizabeth said. "And then I'll read to you. Whatever you'd like." Charlotte looked at her for one more moment with those impossible clear eyes. Then she said quietly, "Can we read the one about the woman who crossed by herself?" Elizabeth closed her eyes for half a second. "Yes," she said. "We can read that one." Downstairs, Nathaniel Whitmore stood at the end of the oak-side table. He was looking at the music box. "Well handled," Margaret said at his elbow, low and sure. "A man in your position must be clear about these things." He said nothing. "She stepped outside her role," Margaret continued. "Allowing that to go unremarked would have set a poor example for the entire household. You did what was necessary." Nathaniel picked up the music box. It was lighter than he'd expected. He turned it over once in his hands, the way Elizabeth had turned it over the night she examined the mechanism. He'd heard about that too, through Pharaoh, through the kitchen chain, and he looked at the small silver key. "Nathaniel," Margaret said. He set the music box back down. He looked at the space in front of the table where Elizabeth Carter had stood with her back straight and her hands at her sides, and said 4 words that had hit him somewhere that had not been hit in a very long time. "For reminding me exactly where I stand." She hadn't said it like an accusation. She hadn't cried. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't begged for sympathy or appealed to the guests or said a single thing that a single person in that room could have pointed to and called improper. She had simply named the truth, his truth, the one he had spoken, and handed it back to him with both hands. And then she had walked away like a woman who had done all that was required of her and would not give him one thing more. "Nathaniel," Margaret said again with a slight edge now. "I heard you, Margaret," he said. He picked up his wine glass. He looked down the long table at his guests, his world in its entirety, comfortable and certain, and arranged in its correct order. He felt, without being able to explain it precisely, like a man standing in a room that had seemed perfectly normal 10 minutes ago and now looked entirely different. "Excuse me," he said. He walked to the window. He stood with his back to the room. In the dark glass he could see the reflection of the table behind him. The guests, the lamplight, all of it arranged just as it should be. And he could see himself the richest man in Virginia, the master of this estate, the lord of everything he surveyed, standing alone at the edge of his own party, holding a glass he hadn't drunk from in 20 minutes. He pressed his hand flat against the window frame, upstairs through the ceiling, through 2 floors and a corridor and a closed door. Somewhere up there, a woman was reading to a child about a woman who crossed something terrifying alone because she decided that love was worth more than sense. He closed his eyes. He thought, "I am the most efficient man I know." He thought, "I have not sat on the floor beside that child once." He thought, "She fixed the music box with a sewing needle and a pocket knife because it did not occur to me to fix it. I thought she walked out of this room and I put my glass down and I have not picked it up since." He opened his eyes. In the dark glass of the window, he looked at the reflection of the man he had spent 35 years becoming. He thought, "I have done something I cannot undo." And the worst of it, the part that sat in him like cold iron, was that he was not entirely sure he was thinking about the dinner. Elizabeth did not sleep that night. She lay in her narrow room at the end of the hall and ran the arithmetic the way her father had taught her. Start with what you know, Elizabeth, and work from there. What she knew. The debt was real. The creditor in Richmond was patient, but patient only went so far. She had been saving carefully, methodically out of her wages every month, and she was not yet halfway. She needed this position. She also knew what had happened tonight and what it meant. A man had told her in front of 18 witnesses that she did not belong. Not in anger, not in a temper. In the cold, deliberate voice of a man who had made a calculation and decided she was not worth the cost of treating her otherwise. She had been in that position before. She had always done the same thing. Hold herself together, sleep it off, present a composed face in the morning, and continue. This was the correct thing to do. She told herself this for a long time in the dark. And then Charlotte's voice came back to her. He put his glass down and didn't pick it up again, and she pressed her face into the pillow and told herself that was nothing. Children made meaning out of gestures. It was what they did. It didn't mean anything. She told herself this several more times. Then she told herself to go to sleep. She didn't sleep. Morning came in pale and quiet. She was downstairs before 6 in the kitchen with Mrs. Booth when she heard him. She knew his footsteps before the door opened. She had learned them months ago, the particular weight and pace of a man who moved through his own house like he was inspecting it rather than living in it. He appeared in the kitchen doorway. His hair wasn't quite in order. He had the face of a man who also hadn't slept, and who had decided somewhere in the long dark of the night to do something about it. Mrs. Booth found a reason to be at the far end of the kitchen. Nathaniel Whitmore looked at Elizabeth. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He tried again. "Miss Carter," he said. "Last evening, what I said to you was—" He stopped. He looked like a man who had come downstairs with a prepared speech and found standing in front of the actual person that every word of it was wrong. "Mr. Whitmore," Elizabeth said. He stopped. She looked at him steadily. Her hands were still. "I accept your apology." He blinked. I hadn't finished." "I know," she said. "But I can see where you were going, and I think we're both better served by getting through it quickly." He was quiet for a moment. "You always do that," he said. "Do what? Take the ground out from under a thing before it has time to get worse." He wasn't saying it like a criticism. He seemed to be observing it the way a man observes a mechanism he doesn't fully understand, but is starting to respect. "It's more efficient," Elizabeth said. "You're a very efficient person." "I've had to be." Something moved in his face at that. Something she wasn't going to look at too directly. He looked at the window. He looked back at her. "Charlotte," he said, "I wanted to say I've noticed that she's better. That she—" He stopped again, and this time it was not because he didn't know the words. It was because the words were larger than he was used to carrying. "She laughed yesterday morning. I heard it from the hall. I didn't know she—" He stopped. "I hadn't heard that before." Elizabeth said nothing. "The music box," he said. "She winds it every morning. She wound it when it was broken too," Elizabeth said. "For 4 months, because the winding was what her mother taught her." He took that in. "I didn't know it was broken," he said. "I should have known." "Yes," Elizabeth said, not unkindly, plainly. He looked at her. He wasn't accustomed to that, to someone agreeing with a self-indictment instead of arguing him out of it. "She talks at dinner now," he said. "Did you teach her that?" "I taught her that what she thinks is worth saying," Elizabeth said. "She did the rest." He nodded, looked at the table, looked back. "Miss Carter," he said, "the things I said last night in the manner that I said them were wrong," Elizabeth said. "Yes." He accepted this. "I won't." He stopped, started again. "I intend to do better by her." "I know," Elizabeth said. "She knows it too. Children know. They always do." He stood there a moment longer than was necessary for a man who had said what he'd come to say. At the door he paused. "Miss Carter," he said without turning, "you should know the music box. I've asked Pharaoh to ensure Charlotte can keep it in whatever room she prefers, permanently." He went. Mrs. Booth reappeared from the far end of the kitchen and began vigorously attending to the bread dough. Elizabeth stood very still for a moment. She thought about a man standing at a dark window with a glass he never picked up again. She thought about 4 months of winding a broken music box. She thought about what it had cost him to come down here before breakfast hat in hand and say I should have known to a woman he had publicly called beneath him the night before. Stop it, she told herself. She pressed her hands flat on the table. You are his employee. He is your employer. This is where you stand. He told you so himself, and he was not wrong, and the heart does not get a vote here. Not a word, she said to Mrs. Booth. Quiet as a grave, Mrs. Booth said cheerfully, pounding the dough. Mrs. Booth. Silent as the hills. I mean it. Oh, I know you do, Mrs. Booth said, and said nothing else, and smiled at the dough. Elizabeth picked up the breakfast tray. She straightened her dress. She went to start the day. Charlotte was waiting. And somewhere in the house, she did not know where, and she told herself it did not matter. Nathaniel Whitmore was starting his day too. Changed by something he hadn't chosen, and not yet sure, not nearly sure, what to do about it. The morning after Nathaniel Whitmore came to the kitchen and couldn't finish his apology, Elizabeth Carter made a decision. She was going to feel nothing. Not because she was cold. Not because she didn't understand what had happened in that kitchen, the unfinished sentences, the way he'd stood at the door longer than necessary, the thing he'd said about Charlotte laughing. She understood all of it. She understood it the way a woman understands a fire she's been told not to touch, completely precisely and with full awareness of what touching it would cost. So she was going to feel nothing. She was very good at this. She'd had practice. She put Charlotte's breakfast on the tray, carried it upstairs, and knocked on the schoolroom door with the same steady knock she used every morning. And when Charlotte opened it and looked up at her with those serious gray eyes, Elizabeth said, "Good morning. We have a lot to get through today." And that was that. Charlotte studied her face for a moment with the unsettling accuracy of a child who had been reading people since before she could read words. Then she said, "All right," and sat down at the table. They got through a great deal. 4 days passed. Nathaniel did not avoid her. That was the thing she hadn't anticipated. She'd expected him to revert to type after the kitchen, to pull back into his study, and his accounts, and his necessary distance, the way powerful men did when they'd shown more of themselves than they'd intended. He didn't. He showed up to dinner every evening. He asked Charlotte questions, not good questions, not yet, but he was trying and trying counted for something. He said things like, "What did Miss Carter teach you today?" And when Charlotte answered, he listened with the particular attention of a man who was learning a skill he should have learned years ago and knew it. He didn't speak much to Elizabeth directly, but he was there. She noticed this without wanting to. On the 5th day, he appeared in the doorway of the schoolroom. Charlotte was working at her slate. Elizabeth was reading at the far end of the table. Neither of them had heard him approach. He moved quietly for a large man, which she'd noted before, and when she looked up, he was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, watching Charlotte draw something at the bottom of her arithmetic page. He wasn't watching the arithmetic. He was watching the drawing. "What is that?" he said. Charlotte looked up without startling. She was used to him appearing now, Elizabeth realized, and that itself was a change. "It's the creek," Charlotte said. "The south one. Miss Carter showed me where the herons nest." Nathaniel looked at the drawing, then at Elizabeth. "There are herons on my property," he said. "3 nests," Elizabeth said, "down past the willow stand." Charlotte found the 3rd one herself. He looked back at the drawing. "I've ridden that creek for 15 years, he said. "They nest in the willows," Elizabeth said. "You'd have to slow down to see them." A pause. "I don't slow down," he said. "I know," Elizabeth said. "Charlotte does." Charlotte held up the slate. "I drew the big one," she said. "Miss Carter says they stand still so long the fish forget they're there." Nathaniel looked at the drawing for a moment. Then he said, "May I?" and held out his hand. Charlotte handed him the slate. He looked at it. Really looked at it. Not the quick dismissive glance of a man performing interest, but the look of someone who is actually seeing something. "She's right," he said at last. "About the standing still." He handed the slate back. He pushed off the doorframe and went back toward his study. Charlotte watched him go. Then she looked at Elizabeth with an expression that said very clearly, "Did you see that?" Elizabeth returned to her book. "Arithmetic," she said. Charlotte went back to her arithmetic, but Elizabeth did not read a single word on the page in front of her for the next 10 minutes. It was Mrs. Booth who told her about the ledger. She hadn't meant to, or maybe she had because Mrs. Booth was a woman who knew exactly what she was doing at all times and claimed otherwise only when it suited her. It came out over the kitchen table on a Wednesday evening in the offhand way that important information always came out in households casually without looking up while both hands were busy with something else. "He's been in the account books again," Mrs. Booth said, trimming the ends off green beans. "The household ones, not the estate accounts." Elizabeth looked up from the letter she was writing. "He always reviews the household accounts. Not these ones." Mrs. Booth set a bean down. "The staff wages. He called Pharaoh in Tuesday morning and went through every line." Elizabeth said nothing. "Yours in particular," Mrs. Booth said, still not looking up. "Asked Pharaoh whether the current arrangement was, I believe the word was appropriate." Elizabeth set her pen down. "And what did Pharaoh say?" "Pharaoh said it was standard for a governess of your position and experience." "And what did Mr. Whitmore say?" Mrs. Booth picked up another bean. "He said adjust it. And then he shut the ledger, and that was that." Elizabeth sat with this for a moment. "He shouldn't have done that," she said finally. "Probably not," Mrs. Booth agreed. "But he did. It complicates things." "Most kindnesses do," Mrs. Booth said. "That's rather the point of them." Elizabeth picked up her pen. She looked at the letter she was writing to the creditor in Richmond, the careful monthly accounting of what she'd paid and what remained. She thought about the number that had just quietly changed without her asking, and what it meant for the calculation, and how much faster the remaining months would close now. She thought about what it meant that he'd done it. "Mrs. Booth," she said. I would prefer not to discuss this further." "We're not discussing anything," Mrs. Booth said. "I was telling you about the household accounts, entirely routine." Elizabeth looked at her. Mrs. Booth trimmed another bean and said nothing and smiled at her hands. The letter from Margaret Caldwell arrived on a Friday. It was addressed to Nathaniel, but Margaret had a habit of sending her correspondence through the household's general post, which meant it passed through Mrs. Booth's hands first, and therefore through general knowledge second, in the way that letters in large houses always did. Elizabeth didn't read it. She would not have read it. But she heard Nathaniel's response to it because she happened to be passing the study door when he dictated it to Pharaoh. And the study door was open 3 inches, which was 3 inches more than it usually was. And she was not the kind of woman who eavesdropped, but she was a woman with ears. "Tell Mrs. Caldwell," Nathaniel said, and his voice had the flat contained quality it got when he was choosing words carefully, "that I appreciate her interest in the welfare of my household, and that I consider the matter she raised in her letter to be fully addressed." A pause. Pharaoh's pen. "And tell her," Nathaniel added, "that the staffing arrangements at Whitmore Estate are not a subject I intend to revisit." Elizabeth walked past the door. She kept her step even. She kept her face composed. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of her bed and pressed both hands flat on her knees and took 3 slow breaths. Then she got up and went back to work. Margaret arrived in person 2 weeks later. She did not send a note this time either, but she came at a different time. Mid-afternoon, when she knew Nathaniel was out on his morning ride and would be back within the hour. She was shown to the front parlor where she sat and waited with the patience of a woman who understood that waiting was itself a form of pressure. Elizabeth was coming down the main staircase when she saw her. She had 2 seconds to decide. She kept walking. Down the stairs across the entry hall toward the parlor. Margaret looked up. Her expression did not shift. She had too much control for that, but something in her eyes adjusted like a calculation being revised. "Miss Carter," she said pleasantly. "What a coincidence." "Mrs. Caldwell," Elizabeth said. "Mr. Whitmore is expected within the hour. I'll let Mrs. Booth know you're here." "Please don't trouble yourself," Margaret said. "Sit with me a moment." Elizabeth should have declined. She sat. Margaret looked at her for a moment with the appraising, unhurried attention of a woman who had learned that the best way to understand your opponent was to give them enough silence to fill. Elizabeth gave her nothing. She sat with her hands in her lap and waited. "You're very good," Margaret said finally. "Not a compliment, an observation." "At what?" Elizabeth said. "At being still." Margaret tilted her head slightly. "Most people fill silence. You don't." "I was raised to be patient," Elizabeth said. "You were raised to be sensible," Margaret corrected pleasantly. "Which is different and considerably more useful." She paused. "I want to speak plainly with you, Miss Carter, because I think you're a woman who responds better to honesty than to delicacy." "Speak however you'd like," Elizabeth said. "Nathaniel is not available to you," Margaret said. Just like that. No warm-up, no hedging. "I don't mean this as an insult. I mean it as a fact. His position, his family, his obligations. And I promise you there are obligations you don't know about, yet make it impossible. Whatever you believe you see in him, whatever has happened in this house in the past months, it cannot go where you might imagine it going." Elizabeth looked at her steadily. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said, "I am Charlotte's governess. I am here to teach the child and manage her education. I don't know what you believe you see, but I can assure you, I see a man who adjusted your wages without being asked," Margaret said. "I see a man who is attending dinner with his ward for the first time in her memory. I see a man who spent 20 minutes looking at a child's drawing last Tuesday, when he has never once in my knowledge of him expressed interest in anything that did not appear in an account book." She paused. "And I see a woman who has made herself necessary to this household in a way that goes considerably beyond arithmetic lessons." Elizabeth said nothing. "I don't blame you," Margaret said, and her voice was almost kind. "You're intelligent, you're capable, and you're in a position that gives you very little power and a great deal of proximity. It would be strange if nothing had grown from that." She leaned forward slightly. "But strange or not, it cannot grow further. The world that man lives in will not permit it. And if you allow it to continue, if you allow him to continue, you will be the one who pays the price. Not him. Never him." She sat back. "That is how it has always worked. That is how it will always work." The parlor was quiet. Outside somewhere on the road a horse was coming. "Mrs. Caldwell," Elizabeth said. Her voice was perfectly even. "Thank you for speaking plainly. I'll return the courtesy." She stood. "I am aware of exactly what my position is. I have been aware of it every single day I have spent in this house. I do not require a reminder, and I do not require your concern." She paused. "But I do appreciate that you came to say this to me directly, rather than to Mr. Whitmore." Margaret looked at her. Something shifted very slightly in those assessing eyes. "I already said it to Nathaniel," Margaret said. "Last week." "I know," Elizabeth said. "I'm appreciating it anyway." She left the parlor. She was at the base of the staircase when the front door opened and Nathaniel came in dusty from the road and stopped when he saw her face. "What?" he said. "Mrs. Caldwell is in the parlor," Elizabeth said. "She's been waiting about 20 minutes." He looked past her toward the parlor door, then back at her. "Are you all right?" he said. It was such a simple question. 4 words. And it landed with the weight of something much larger, because he was looking at her the way people look when they actually want to know the answer, not when they're performing the asking. "I'm fine," she said. He held her gaze for one more second. Then he went to the parlor. Elizabeth went upstairs. She did not hear what he said to Margaret. She didn't try to. She went to the schoolroom, sat down at the table, opened a book, and read the same page 4 times without retaining a single word. Charlotte appeared in the doorway. "Is everything all right?" she said. "Fine," Elizabeth said. "You said that to Uncle Nathaniel, too," Charlotte said. "On the stairs. I was at the top." Elizabeth put the book down. "Charlotte," she said, "come sit with me." The child crossed the room and sat beside her. "Some things are complicated," Elizabeth said. "Not bad, not good, just complicated. Do you understand that? Like how Uncle Nathaniel is learning to be different, but he doesn't know how to ask for help with it," Charlotte said. Elizabeth looked at her. "Yes," she said. "Like that." Charlotte nodded. "I know about that," she said with perfect 8-year-old gravity. I was like that when Mama died. I knew I needed something, but I didn't know what it was until you came." Elizabeth was quiet for a moment. "You're too wise for 8 years old," she said. "Mama said the same thing," Charlotte said. "She said I'd earned it the hard way." Elizabeth reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind the child's ear. "She was right," she said. He started coming to the schoolroom in the afternoons, not to observe, not to inspect. He would appear in the doorway with some business of the estate, a question for Pharaoh that happened to route him past the east wing, a letter he needed to review near the window, and he would stay sometimes for a few minutes, sometimes for half an hour, and the pretexts were thin enough that no one believed them. But he kept providing them, and Elizabeth kept accepting them at face value, because accepting things at face value was the only way to survive the situation she was in. He started asking Charlotte questions. Better ones. The arithmetic questions first. He was good with numbers, and Charlotte was not, and he discovered, apparently with genuine surprise, that he could explain the same concept 3 different ways until the right way landed. And the look on Charlotte's face when it landed was, he didn't have a word for it, but he kept showing up to find it again. Then history questions. He knew American history in the precise functional way of a man who had used it for argument and business, and Elizabeth knew it in the rounder, stranger way of someone who had read the people inside it, and they disagreed more than once at the table in front of Charlotte, not angrily, but genuinely, about whether a certain general had been wise or merely lucky, whether a certain treaty had been justice or just an ending. And Charlotte listened to these arguments with the bright lit-up face of a child watching 2 people she respected refuse to agree, and Elizabeth realized somewhere in the 3rd week of this that she was happy. Not quietly content, not simply functional, happy. She noticed this the way you notice a window has been open for days without your realizing it by the absence of the stuffiness you'd gotten used to. She told herself it was dangerous. She told herself this every day. She kept showing up anyway because Charlotte needed her, and because whatever she told herself in the dark didn't seem to have jurisdiction over what happened in the schoolroom at 3 in the afternoon, when Nathaniel Whitmore sat across from his niece and explained fractions with a piece of bread and a very serious expression, and Charlotte laughed so hard she knocked her slate off the table. The letter from Richmond arrived on a Tuesday. Not the creditor. A different letter from a woman named Mrs. Alcott, who ran a boarding school for young women in Philadelphia and had heard of Elizabeth through the Hargrove family reference, and who wrote to inquire whether Miss Carter might be interested in a position as senior instructress, beginning in September, at a wage that made Elizabeth set the letter down and pick it up and read the number again. It was more than twice what she made at Whitmore Estate, even with the adjustment. She sat with the letter for a long time. September was 6 weeks away. She ran the arithmetic. She always ran the arithmetic. At the Philadelphia wage, the debt to Richmond could be cleared in under a year. The path that had always been narrow and precarious would become not wide but walkable. She could build something, a real life, the kind with a floor under it that didn't depend on one household's goodwill and one man's continued restraint. She folded the letter. She put it in the inside pocket of her dress close to her chest. She went to teach Charlotte her French. She did not mention the letter. She hadn't mentioned it by Thursday. She hadn't mentioned it by the following Monday. By the following Wednesday, Charlotte had learned the French word for autumn, and said it was the saddest word she'd ever heard in any language, and Elizabeth had agreed, and had not said anything about September, and the letter was still in her pocket, and she was aware of this every moment of every day, in the way that you are aware of a splinter that has gone too deep to reach but is not yet infected. She was going to tell him. She was going to tell him because it was his household, and he had a right to know, and because Charlotte would need time to adjust to a new governess, and because she was not the kind of woman who made other people's lives harder for her own convenience. She told herself this. She told herself she would do it on Friday. On Thursday evening she was in the library, the small one, Robert's one, returning a book, when she heard footsteps and turned and found Nathaniel in the doorway. He stopped. "I didn't know you were in here," he said. "I was returning a book," she said. She held it up as proof. Richardson's Pamela, which she'd borrowed 3 weeks ago and finished in a week, and had been meaning to bring back ever since. "I'll leave you. You can stay," he said. She stayed. He crossed to the shelf on the far side and took down a volume she couldn't see the title of, and they were in the same room with the evening coming down outside, and the lamp between them, and the silence was the kind of silence that had weight to it, not uncomfortable but present like a third person sitting quietly in the corner. "Charlotte told me," he said after a while, not looking up from his book, "that you used to live in Richmond." "For a time," Elizabeth said, "after your father died." "Before and after. My father had a practice there." She paused. "Law. He was a legal man." Nathaniel looked up at that. "I didn't know." "There's no reason you would." He was quiet for a moment. "A legal man's daughter," he said, "working as a governess." "A legal man with $400 in debt," Elizabeth said. "Those are different things." He looked at her with an expression she had learned over months to identify the look of a man who had said something he thought was neutral and discovered it wasn't. "I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant," she said. "I'm not offended. It's the truth. My father was a good man and a poor accountant, and the debt is mine to manage now." A pause. "Is it managed?" he said. She looked at him. "Getting there," she said. Which was true, and was also the moment she should have told him about the Philadelphia letter, and she didn't, and she felt the letter against her ribs like a coal. He went back to his book. She went back to hers. They read in the same room for nearly an hour. He did not try to fill the silence. Neither did she. The lamp burned between them, and the evening went full dark outside, and somewhere in the house, Charlotte was asleep with the music box on the windowsill and the waltz wound and ready for morning. When Elizabeth finally rose to leave, she said good night, and he said good night, and she was 3 steps from the door when he said her name. Not Miss Carter. Her name. "Elizabeth." She stopped. She did not turn around immediately. She took one breath. Then she turned. He was looking at her from his chair, his book closed on his knee, and his face had the open, unguarded look of a man who had run out of walls for the evening. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. "For the dinner. For all of it. I said things that were deliberate, not careless, and the deliberateness was worse." "Yes," she said. "It was. I knew what I was doing when I said them." "I know you did. And it had nothing to do with your position," he said, "or with propriety, or with anything I told myself it was about." She looked at him. "What was it about?" she said quietly. He looked at his closed book. He looked at the lamp. He looked at her. "I was afraid," he said, "of what was in the room." She said nothing. "Of what I was going to have to admit," he said, "if I let it continue." Elizabeth stood very still. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. "Nathaniel," he said. "Not a correction, a request." She looked at him for a long moment in the lamplight. This man who had come down to a kitchen before sunrise to say sorry, who had bent over a child's drawing of a heron, who had sat for an hour in the same room with her, because he could not think of a reason not to, who had just told her the one true thing he'd been refusing to say for months. "There are things," she said carefully, "that I have not told you, that I need to tell you." Something shifted in his face. "All right." "Not tonight," she said. "It's late. Charlotte has lessons in the morning, and I have things to think through first." He nodded. He didn't push. She went to the door. "Elizabeth," he said again, and quietly. She paused without turning. "However it comes out," he said, "whatever you haven't told me, I want you to know that nothing I've said about your position, you're worth any of it. I want you to know that I know I was wrong. Not because it served me to be wrong, because I was." She stood in the doorway with her back to him and her hand on the frame. "Good night, Nathaniel," she said. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of her bed. She took the Philadelphia letter out of her pocket. She smoothed it flat on her knee. She read the number again. And then she did something she very rarely allowed herself. She pressed her face into her hands and stayed there in the dark for a long time. Because the letter was real, and the debt was real, and September was 6 weeks away, and the path it offered was real solid and clear, and entirely perfectly safe. And the thing she was feeling sitting in the chair across from a lamp, with a man who had just said, I was afraid of what was in the room that was real too. And she did not yet know which real thing was going to win. She did not sleep for a long time. Outside her window, Virginia went on in the dark, the creek and the willows and the heron nests she'd shown Charlotte, and somewhere beyond them, the road to Richmond, and somewhere beyond that, the road to Philadelphia, and somewhere in this house, a man was sitting in a small library with a closed book, and learning for the first time in his life what it felt like to have said the true thing and not taken it back. She folded the letter. She put it under her pillow. She lay in the dark and thought about what it meant to be standing exactly where she stood. She thought one of these things has to give. She thought, I am not ready for it to be me. And then the night went quiet around her, and the house settled, and somewhere at the end of the hall, a music box sat wound and waiting for morning. She told him about the letter on a Friday morning. She had planned to do it Thursday, then Wednesday, then the Thursday before that. Each time she had found a reason. That was almost a reason. Charlotte was tired. Nathaniel was in a meeting with Pharaoh. The timing wasn't right, and each time the letter had stayed under her pillow, and the days had kept moving, and September had kept getting closer, like a wall she was walking toward with her eyes open. Friday morning, she went to his study before breakfast. She knocked. He said, "Come in." She came in and stood in front of his desk and said, "I need to tell you something." And she said it quickly before she could find another reason not to. The way her father had always told her to pull a splinter fast clean, don't think about it first. She told him about Philadelphia, the school, Mrs. Alcott, the wage, September. She told him all of it in under 2 minutes, standing with her hands at her sides, and when she finished, she looked at him directly and waited. He was very still. He had been reviewing accounts when she knocked, and his pen was still in his hand, and he set it down with the careful deliberateness of a man making sure he didn't do it too hard. "September," he said. "6 weeks," she said. "I haven't replied yet. I wanted to tell you first, so Charlotte has time to—" "6 weeks," he said again. Not a question. He was looking at his desk. Then he looked up. "How long have you had this letter?" She held his gaze. 3 weeks. Something moved in his face. 3 weeks. Yes. You've been carrying this for 3 weeks. I needed to think. And have you, he said. Thought. I'm still thinking, she said. He stood up. He wasn't a man who paced. She'd noticed that before the way he held himself still when other men would move, but he walked to the window and stood there with his back to her and his hand on the frame. It's a good position, he said. Yes. Better wages. Considerably. Philadelphia is a good city for a woman building something of her own. I know, she said. He turned around. Then why haven't you said yes? Elizabeth looked at him. She could have said a dozen things. She chose the honest one. Because I haven't been able to make myself write the word. The room went quiet. Charlotte, he said, and it was half question, half statement. Charlotte is part of it, she said. Yes. He heard the part of it. She watched him hear it. Something in his jaw tightened and released. Elizabeth. Don't, she said, quiet but firm. Whatever you're about to say, don't say it yet. I need to make this decision without... She stopped, started again. I need to make it for the right reasons. Not because of anything that may or may not be happening in this house. Because the position is right. Or because Charlotte still needs me. Those are real reasons. The other things are real too, he said. She looked at him. They're real too, he said again, steadily. Whatever you're calling them. She pressed her hands together in front of her. Nathaniel. I am a governess with a debt and no family, and a letter from Philadelphia. You are the largest landowner in Virginia. Whatever is real, the world that exists outside this room has opinions about what's possible, and those opinions have consequences. You know this. I know this. Pretending otherwise helps neither of us. I'm not pretending anything, he said. Then what are you doing? He was quiet for a moment. I'm asking you, he said, not to decide yet. She looked at him for a long time. I have 6 weeks, she said. I know, he said. I'm asking you to use them." She left the study. She did not write to Mrs. Alcott that day. She told herself she would write tomorrow. Margaret Caldwell came back on a Saturday. This time she brought Cecilia. Cecilia was everything. Her mother had trained her to be gracious, well-dressed, conversationally smooth, the kind of beautiful that was maintained rather than accidental. She greeted Nathaniel with warmth that stopped precisely at the line of impropriety, asked after Charlotte with the right amount of interest, and sat in the parlor with the composed ease of a young woman who had been practicing this exact situation for years. Elizabeth was not in the parlor. She heard about it from Charlotte, who had been brought down to greet the guests and had sat in the corner of the room for 20 minutes before being released, and who came back to the schoolroom with the careful face she wore when she had opinions she was deciding whether to share. "Miss Caldwell is pretty," Charlotte said. "I'm sure she is," Elizabeth said. "She asked Uncle Nathaniel about the harvest." "That's very practical of her." She laughed at everything he said. Charlotte paused. Even when it wasn't funny. Elizabeth kept her eyes on the book she was marking. People do that when they want someone to like them. "Do you do that?" Charlotte said. "No," Elizabeth said. "I know," Charlotte said. "That's why he talks to you differently." Elizabeth put the book down. "Charlotte, he doesn't perform with you," Charlotte said with the blunt precision of a child who has been listening to adults for years and has learned their language better than they know. "With other people, he's managing them. With you, he forgets to manage." Elizabeth looked at this child who was 8 years old and understood more about human nature than most people twice her age. "You're going to be formidable when you grow up," she said. "I know," Charlotte said. "Will you still be here when I do?" The question landed clean and sharp. Charlotte's questions always did without cushion or warning. "I don't know," Elizabeth said honestly. Charlotte nodded the way she nodded when she received information that hurt, but that she'd already prepared herself to receive. "I hope you will be," she said. Then she picked up her French primer and opened it to the lesson, and she did not say anything else, and Elizabeth sat across from her and thought about the letter under her pillow and September, and the word formidable, and the precise particular sound of a child deciding not to cry. The dinner happened because Margaret arranged it, and Nathaniel did not stop it. Elizabeth understood this later, that the failure was not in the arrangement, but in the not stopping. Margaret had proposed it over the Saturday visit, framed it as a small family dinner. Intimate, just the Caldwells and 2 other families, a chance for Cecilia and Nathaniel to spend time in a setting less formal than the summer party. Nathaniel had said yes. Elizabeth had not been told about it until Wednesday, when Mrs. Booth mentioned the menu, and she had felt something cold move through her that she did not name. It was not jealousy. She was not willing to call it that. It was the feeling of a wall going up where there had briefly been a window. She kept this to herself. It was not her dinner. It was not her household. Not really, not in any way that the world recognized. She cooked Charlotte's lessons and brought her to the piano and read to her at night and wound the music box when Charlotte forgot, and she said nothing about the dinner and felt nothing about the dinner and told herself both of these things firmly enough that they were almost true. The dinner was on a Thursday. She had Charlotte in bed by 8 and was in her room by 8:30 with a book she wasn't reading when she heard it. Not the dinner was on the ground floor, far enough that she heard only the shape of it. Voices and movement, and the occasional sound of Cecilia Caldwell's laugh, which carried. What she heard was different. Footsteps on the stairs past the 2nd floor to the 3rd. The servants' level. Her level. She knew the weight of them. She sat very still. A knock at her door. Quiet. Certain. She opened it. Nathaniel stood in the hallway. He was still in his dinner clothes, and he looked like a man who had excused himself from his own table and come upstairs without entirely deciding to which was in fact exactly what had happened. She looked at him. "You're supposed to be at dinner," she said. "I know," he said. "Cecilia Caldwell is downstairs." "I know that too." "Nathaniel, I couldn't sit there anymore," he said. "I tried. I sat there for 2 hours and I tried." She leaned against the doorframe. And all I could think," he said, "was that you were up here, that you were up here, and that you have 6 weeks, and that I am running out of time to say the things I should have said months ago." He stopped. He looked at her the way men look when they have finally put down something heavy. "I am not interested in Cecilia Caldwell. I am not interested in anything Margaret Caldwell is building downstairs. I am interested in you. I have been interested in nothing else for months, and I have been a coward about it, and I'm done being a coward." Elizabeth looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said, "before someone sees you in this hallway." He came in. She did not light another lamp. The one on the table was enough, and more light felt like more exposure than either of them needed right now. She sat in the chair. He stood. He was too restless to sit. "Say what you need to say," she said. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not as Charlotte's governess. I want to find a way to make this something that the world can look at without I know what I'm asking. I know what it looks like from where you're standing. A powerful man asking a woman with fewer options to take a risk he won't share equally. I know that's what it looks like." "It's not just what it looks like," she said. "It's what it is." "Yes," he said. "It is. And I don't have an answer for that yet. I'm not asking you to give up Philadelphia. I'm not asking you to choose tonight. I'm asking you." He stopped. "I'm asking you if it's possible. If there's anything here that's worth—" "Nathaniel," she said. He stopped. "You went downstairs to have dinner with a suitable woman," she said. "Margaret Caldwell picked her for you. Your entire world expects you to make that choice. I am a governess with a debt and a letter from Philadelphia, and no claim on anything in this house." She paused. "And you are standing in my room." He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "I am." "That is the problem," she said. "Not the feeling. The feeling I can manage. The problem is that you are standing in my room instead of sitting at your dinner table, and tomorrow morning the world will still be the world. It was tonight, and I will still be what I am in it, and all of this will be just as complicated as it is right now. The feeling doesn't change that." "I know," he said. "Then what are you asking me for?" He was quiet for a moment. "Hope," he said. "I'm asking for whether there's any." She looked at him in the lamplight, this man who had learned to sit on the floor with a child, who had come down to a kitchen before sunrise, who had stood in a corridor listening to a story about love being worth more than sense, who was standing in a servant's room in his dinner clothes because he could not get through the evening without saying what he'd come to say. "Go back to your dinner," she said. His face shifted. "Elizabeth." "Go back," she said. "Be decent to Cecilia Caldwell, who has done nothing wrong. Finish the evening. And tomorrow—" She stopped. She looked at her hands. "Tomorrow is tomorrow." He stood there for one more moment. Then he said, "Is there hope?" She kept her eyes on her hands. "There is always hope," she said. "That's the trouble with it." He left. She sat in the chair for a long time after his footsteps went back down the stairs. She heard the dinner resume below. She heard Cecilia Caldwell laugh at something. She pressed both hands over her face and stayed very still, and told herself for the 100th time that feeling things was not the same as acting on them, and that she was a practical woman, and that practical women did not sit in lamplight, hoping for things the world had told them they could not have. She sat there until the guests left. She did not move until the house went quiet. Margaret found out by Sunday. Elizabeth did not know how the house had been quiet. Nathaniel had returned to the dinner. There had been no witness she could identify, but Margaret Caldwell had been navigating Virginia society for 20 years, and she had not done it by missing things. She arrived on Sunday afternoon with no Cecilia and no pleasantness. She went directly to Nathaniel's study, and the door was closed, and Elizabeth was in the garden with Charlotte when Mrs. Booth appeared at the door with a face that said everything without saying anything. "Take Charlotte to the kitchen for some pie," Mrs. Booth said, with a specificity that meant get the child away from whatever is about to happen. Elizabeth looked at her. "Now would be best," Mrs. Booth said. Charlotte went to the kitchen. Elizabeth stood in the garden and waited. She heard it anyway. Margaret's voice carried when she intended it to, and she intended it to now. "This has gone far enough." The words came through the study window clear and deliberate. You went upstairs at your own dinner party, Nathaniel. People noticed. Do you understand what I'm telling you? People noticed. She couldn't hear Nathaniel's response. He had not raised his voice, and he never would, which was its own kind of answer. I have spent 2 years building something that will benefit this family, Margaret said. Cecilia is a good match. She is appropriate. She is what you need. And you are throwing it away for a woman who cannot be seen in your dining room as a guest. A pause. Then Nathaniel's voice lower but clear. Get out of my house, Margaret. A long silence. You'll regret this, Margaret said. Show yourself out, he said. Elizabeth heard the study door open. She heard Margaret's footsteps cross the entry hall. She heard the front door close. She stood in the garden and breathed. She thought, he just did that for me. And then immediately she thought, that is exactly what I was afraid of. Because a man who turned away a suitable match in anger was not a man who had solved anything. He was a man who had made a decision on feeling without thinking through what came next. And what came next was the world they both lived in. And that world did not rearrange itself because one man in one study had told a woman to show herself out. She went inside. She went to the study. She knocked. Come in, he said. She came in. Howe was standing by the window, and he looked like a man who had just said the thing he'd been building toward for weeks and was not yet sure if it had been right. I heard, she said. He looked at her. Elizabeth? Was that for me? She said. Or was it for you? He paused. Both. Then I need you to listen to me, she said. Because what you just did sending her out like that will have consequences. Not for you. You're Nathaniel Whitmore, and you can afford to make enemies of the Caldwells. But for me. She stopped. If this goes wrong, I am the one who loses the references. I am the one the story gets told about. I am the one who becomes the governess who forgot her place. Not you. Never you. He looked like he'd been struck. I hadn't. He stopped. I didn't think about that. I know you didn't, she said. Not unkindly, but plainly. Elizabeth. His voice had changed. Something had gone out of it. The heat of the moment, and what was left was something quieter and more serious. Tell me what to do. I'm not good at this. I've never been good at this. Tell me what I should do. She looked at him. Stop acting on feeling, she said, and start acting on thought. Because feelings are real, but they don't keep a woman safe in a world that has decided what she is. Thought does. Planning does. Doing things in the right order does. What is the right order? He said. I don't know yet, she said. I'm still thinking. Then think out loud, he said. Let me be part of it. She looked at him for a long time. You have to make this right with Margaret, she said. His expression hardened. No. Not for her sake, Elizabeth said. For Charlotte's, for the household, for the reputation of this estate and everyone in it, including me. You can disagree with her. You don't have to do what she wants. But you cannot make an enemy of a woman like that without it costing everyone around you, and the people around you cannot afford what it will cost them. He was quiet for a moment. And if I do that, he said, if I manage it properly, then what? Then we think, Elizabeth said, together about what is actually possible. And Philadelphia, he said. She held his gaze. I haven't written to Mrs. Alcott. Something shifted in his face. You haven't? No, she said. I haven't. He was very still. Elizabeth, he said. Don't, she said. Don't say anything yet. We're thinking. That's all we're doing. She left the study. She went to the kitchen and sat down beside Charlotte, who was on her second piece of pie and pretending not to have noticed anything, and Elizabeth picked up Charlotte's fork and stole a bite, and Charlotte said, Hey, with genuine indignation, and Elizabeth said, Governess's privilege, and Charlotte laughed, and the laugh was real, and the kitchen was warm, and for exactly 3 minutes, Elizabeth Carter let herself be in the only moment that existed. Then Mrs. Booth looked at her over the top of Charlotte's head, and Elizabeth looked back, and they said nothing to each other, and understood everything. Margaret did not leave quietly. Elizabeth should have known she wouldn't. A woman who had spent 20 years in Virginia society did not absorb a public dismissal and vanish. She absorbed it, filed it, and used it. The letters started arriving within the week, not to Nathaniel, to other households, to the Beaumonts, the Fairfaxes, the Prestons, the same families who had been at the summer dinner, the same people who had watched Elizabeth curtsy and walk out. The letters were social-friendly, entirely innocuous on the surface, and they contained the particular kind of information that didn't require a word out of place to do its damage. The Beaumont daughter, who was 19 and had nothing better to do than carry news from household to household, like a very elegant postal system, told the Preston housekeeper, who told Mrs. Booth, who told Elizabeth on a Tuesday morning, that Margaret Caldwell was saying to anyone who would listen that Nathaniel Whitmore had formed an inappropriate attachment to his ward's governess, that the household was in a state of disorder, that the child was being raised without proper supervision, and that any family intending to do business with the Whitmore Estate might consider the current management of it before committing. Elizabeth sat with this for a long time. Then she went to Nathaniel. He already knew. Pharaoh had told him that morning. He was very controlled about it, the way he was very controlled about everything, but his jaw had the tight set of a man swallowing something that burned. "Let me handle it," he said. "How?" she said. "I'll write to the Beaumonts, the Prestons. Clarify." "Clarify what?" she said. "What story do you tell them that doesn't confirm the one she's already told?" He stopped. "You can't write your way out of this," she said. "Any response you make proves there's something to respond to." "Then what do we do?" "You do nothing," she said. "You go about your business. You attend the Beaumont supper next week, and you are exactly who you have always been. You don't explain, and you don't defend, and you don't give them anything to work with." "And you," he said. She looked at him steadily. "I do my job," she said. "I teach Charlotte. I conduct myself exactly as I always have. I give no one anything to point at." "That means we stop?" He stopped himself. "We stop having evening conversations in the library," she said. "Yes, we stop having anything that can be seen and interpreted. For now." He looked at her. "For now." "I'm still thinking," she said. "Elizabeth," he said. "I need to know." "I know what you need," she said. "Give me time." I gave her time. It was the hardest thing he'd done in years, which told him more about himself than he wanted to know. The Beaumont supper was on a Friday. Nathaniel went. He was exactly who he had always been: composed, authoritative, the most efficient man in the room. He spoke about the harvest and the roads and the question of the new federal tariff, and he said nothing about Margaret Caldwell or Elizabeth Carter or anything that mattered, and he came home at 10 o'clock and went directly to his study. Elizabeth heard him come in. She was in her room. She did not go to the hallway. The next morning, Charlotte was practicing the piano when Nathaniel came into the parlor and sat down in the chair nearest the instrument and listened. Charlotte stopped playing. She looked at him. "Don't stop," he said. Charlotte looked at the keys. She started again from the beginning. The simplest piece. The first one Elizabeth had taught her, and played it slowly and carefully with her tongue between her teeth, the way she did when she was concentrating. Elizabeth stood in the doorway. Nathaniel did not look at her. He listened to Charlotte play. When Charlotte finished, she turned on the bench and said, "Was it all right?" "It was more than all right," he said. "Play it again." Charlotte played it again. Elizabeth watched this man, who 3 months ago had not eaten dinner with his own ward, who had moved through his house like a man managing an estate, rather than living a life, sit in a parlor chair, and listen to a child play the same simple piece twice. And she thought about what it cost him to have become this, and what it would cost him to go back. She thought, he cannot go back. She thought, neither can I. She went to her room and took the Philadelphia letter out from under her pillow. She sat on the bed for a long time. Then she opened the small writing desk her father had given her, and she picked up her pen, and she wrote the most important letter she had written since her father died. Not to Mrs. Alcott in Philadelphia, to the creditor in Richmond. She wrote, "I am writing to inform you that the debt will be settled in full by October of this year. and to request confirmation of the final amount, including all accrued interest. She sealed it. She set it on the table. She looked at the Philadelphia letter one last time. Then she folded it carefully and opened the bottom drawer of the writing desk and placed it inside face down. She was not ready to say it out loud yet. She was not ready to say anything out loud yet. But she had made the first decision, the real one, the one underneath all the other ones, and her hands were steady, and the room was quiet, and she sat with it the way her father had always told her to sit with a hard choice, long enough to know it was yours. The letter to Richmond was on the table. The letter to Philadelphia was in the drawer. And Nathaniel Whitmore was downstairs asking his niece to play the same song a third time. She pressed her hand flat on the writing desk. She breathed. She thought, whatever happens next, it starts from here. She picked up the letter to Richmond, put it in her pocket, and went to post it before she could change her mind. Downstairs, the piano played on. The letter to Richmond came back in 4 days. The final figure was $382 less than she'd feared, more than she had, and the kind of number that had a shape to it, a weight, something she could hold in her mind and work against. The creditor's response was formal and courteous, and confirmed what she already knew, that she was close, that she had been careful, and that careful had limits. She put the letter in the drawer beside the Philadelphia one. She did not tell Nathaniel. She told herself this was because the financial matter was hers, which was true. She told herself it had nothing to do with the fact that if she told him the number, he would try to solve it, and if he solved it, she would owe him something she did not know how to owe. She went to teach Charlotte her French. Charlotte was distracted that morning, not unhappy, just somewhere else, with the inward look she got when she was working something out. "Automne," Elizabeth said. Again. "Automne," Charlotte repeated. Then, "Miss Carter, can I ask you something?" "You can ask me anything." "Are you going to marry Uncle Nathaniel?" Elizabeth set her pen down. She looked at Charlotte with the full, careful attention the question deserved. "Where did that come from?" she said. "Mrs. Booth told Cook that something was happening," Charlotte said. "And Cook told the stable boy, and he told me when I was visiting Bramble." "You shouldn't be in the stables alone," Elizabeth said. "I know," Charlotte said. "Are you, Charlotte?" "Because I would like it," Charlotte said with the directness of a child who had decided that honesty was the only currency worth spending. "I would like it very much. I want you to stay. And I think he does too. And I know the world has rules about it, but the world's rules made Mama cry sometimes, and I don't think the world's rules are always right." Elizabeth was quiet for a moment. "The world's rules," she said carefully, "are not always right. You're correct about that, but they are real. And real things have consequences whether they're right or not." "So you're leaving," Charlotte said. Just like that, flat and certain, and 8 years old. "I haven't decided anything," Elizabeth said. "You put something in a drawer," Charlotte said. "You put it face down." Elizabeth stared at her. "I saw you," Charlotte said. "Through the doorway. I wasn't spying. I was coming to ask about breakfast." "That was a private matter." "I know," Charlotte said. "I didn't read it." She paused. "Was it the Philadelphia letter?" The room was very still. "Yes," Elizabeth said. Charlotte nodded. She looked at the French primer in front of her. She smoothed the page with one hand, the way she smoothed things when she was managing herself. "All right," she said. "Charlotte," Autumny Charlotte said, "the lesson." Elizabeth looked at this child, this small, precise, heartbroken child, and thought about what it meant to be loved by someone who knew how to let you go while still hoping you wouldn't. "Automne," she said. They continued the lesson. Neither of them said another word about the drawer. Nathaniel found out about the Philadelphia letter from Mrs. Booth. Not because Mrs. Booth told him directly, she was too careful for that, but because he asked her on a Wednesday evening in the kitchen when Elizabeth was upstairs and Charlotte was asleep, whether she had noticed anything different about Miss Carter in the past few weeks. Mrs. Booth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You should ask her that yourself, sir." "I'm asking you," he said. "And I'm telling you," Mrs. Booth said, with the steady patience of a woman who had worked in this house for 11 years and had earned the right to say hard things plainly, that there are conversations happening in this household that need to happen between the right people. I'm not the right people. Is she leaving? He said. Mrs. Booth looked at him. Sir, she said, what are you going to do about it if she is? He was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, he said. Then you'd better figure that out, Mrs. Booth said, before you ask questions that you don't have answers to. He left the kitchen. He went to his study. He sat at his desk. He looked at his account books. His correspondence, the systematic architecture of a life he had built entirely around the management of things he could control. He thought about what Mrs. Booth had said. What are you going to do about it? He thought about the answer to that question. How was there until 2 in the morning? He came to her on a Thursday, not the evening. The morning earlier than the kitchen conversation, early enough that the house was still dark and the first birds were only just starting outside. She heard the knock and knew it was him. She opened the door. He was already dressed. He had not slept, she could see that clearly, and he had the look of a man who had decided something and was afraid of what it would cost him, but had decided it anyway. Come in, she said. He came in. He did not sit. He stood in the middle of the room with his hands at his sides and looked at her and said, I want to ask you to stay, not as Charlotte's governess, as... He stopped. I want to court you properly, with your permission, in whatever way is possible, through whatever arrangement is honest and appropriate. I want to do it right, Elizabeth. I know I've done almost everything wrong up until now. I want to do this right. She looked at him. She had imagined this moment. She had not let herself imagine it, and she had imagined it anyway, the way you imagine the thing you've told yourself not to want. Nathaniel, she said. I know what you're going to say, he said. Do you? You're going to say that the world has rules, that the cost falls on you, that I can afford risks you can't. All of that is true, she said. I know it is, he said, and I'm not asking you to pretend otherwise. I'm asking you to let me find a way to make it equitable, to bear the weight of it equally. I don't know yet exactly how, but I want to try, and I want you to know that I am asking you, not telling you, not assuming, asking you whether this is something you want. She stood in the lamplight and looked at him. There's a letter under my pillow, she said. He went very still. From Philadelphia, she said. And there's one in the drawer, from Richmond, the debt. She paused. $382. He was quiet. Then, I can... No, she said. You cannot. That is mine. I will settle it myself on my own terms, in my own time. What I'm telling you is that the path exists. Philadelphia is real. The money is real. The independence is real. She looked at him steadily. I am not a woman without options. I need you to understand that. I understand it, he said. Good, she said. Because what I choose to do, if I choose anything, it has to be a choice I make from strength. Not from need. Not because I ran out of road. From strength. Yes, he said. That's the only way I'd want it. She breathed. I haven't written to Mrs. Alcott, she said. I know, he said softly. Mrs. Booth. Of course, she said. A pause. Elizabeth, he said. Is there anything I can do right now today that would help you decide? She thought about it. Stop protecting me from the conversation, she said. I don't need you managing the situation from the outside. If we're doing this, we're doing it with our eyes open, both of us. All right, he said. And Charlotte needs to know, she said. Not what we are, not yet. But she needs to know I'm not leaving without telling her first. She's been deciding not to ask. I know, he said. I'll speak to her. I'll speak to her, Elizabeth said. She trusts me. He nodded. Something in his face shifted, not wounded, but humbled in the genuine way. Yes, she does. More than she trusts me yet. She's getting there, Elizabeth said. You've been showing up. I learned it from watching you, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, Go get some sleep, Nathaniel. You look terrible. Something that was almost a smile moved across his face. "Good morning, Elizabeth," he said. "Good morning," she said. He went. She stood in the middle of her room for a long time after he left. Then she went to the writing desk, opened the drawer, took out the Philadelphia letter, and read it one more time. She read the wage. She read the title Senior Instructress. She read Mrs. Alcott's neat formal handwriting and the careful description of a life that would be entirely safely hers. She put it back. She did not put it face down this time. The twist came from a direction she hadn't seen. It always did. It was Pharaoh who brought the news on a Friday morning, arriving at the study door with the careful face of a man carrying information he would prefer not to carry. Elizabeth was not in the study. She heard it through the open window of the schoolroom, which faced the same courtyard as the study window, and sound traveled in ways that old houses never accounted for. Pharaoh said, "Sir, there's been a development regarding the Caldwell claim." She stopped marking Charlotte's page. Nathaniel said, "What claim?" Pharaoh said, "Mrs. Caldwell has consulted an attorney in Richmond regarding Charlotte." The schoolroom went very quiet. Nathaniel said very carefully, "Regarding Charlotte, in what respect?" Pharaoh said, "She is contesting the guardianship. Her argument is that as a widowed woman of means with no romantic entanglement, she is better placed to provide appropriate care and social introduction for a young girl of Charlotte's." "She's 8, Nathaniel said. "Yes, sir. The attorney argues that the current household arrangements, specifically the nature of the relationship between yourself and the governess, create an unstable environment for the child." A pause. A long one. "The nature of the relationship," Nathaniel repeated. "Yes, sir." Elizabeth set her pen down. Her hands were perfectly steady. This was the thing she had known in the back of her mind was possible. The thing she had not let herself say aloud, because saying it aloud made it real. Margaret Caldwell had just turned this into a legal matter, and the center of her argument was Elizabeth Carter. Charlotte was at the far end of the schoolroom, still at her slate, and had not heard, or had chosen to appear not to have heard, which with Charlotte was often the same thing. Elizabeth stood up. She said quietly, "Charlotte, please continue the arithmetic. I'll be back in a moment." Charlotte looked at her. "Is everything all right?" "Keep working," Elizabeth said gently. She went downstairs. She did not knock on the study door. She opened it. Pharaoh turned. Nathaniel looked at her. Neither of them spoke. "I heard," she said. She came in and closed the door. She looked at Nathaniel. "How strong is the claim?" "Pharaoh," Nathaniel said. Pharaoh cleared his throat. "On its own merits, not strong. The guardianship was established legally on Robert Whitmore's death, and Mr. Whitmore has fulfilled all obligations without contest for 2 years. A challenge based on character or household management is difficult to sustain." He paused. "However, if Mrs. Caldwell can demonstrate through witnesses' correspondence or testimony that the household is being managed in a manner that creates genuine moral or social risk to the child, a sympathetic judge might grant an inquiry." "A sympathetic judge," Nathaniel said. "The Caldwells have connections in the Richmond courts," Pharaoh said carefully. Nathaniel was looking at Elizabeth. She was looking at the floor. She was doing the only thing she knew how to do in moments like this, running the arithmetic. All of it. Fast. Margaret had timed this deliberately. She had waited until the social letters had done their work, until the story about Nathaniel and the governess was already in circulation, until there was enough smoke that a judge in Richmond could point at it and call it fire. She had turned a social campaign into a legal one, and the weapon she was using was Elizabeth Carter's presence in this house. "I need to resign," Elizabeth said. The room went absolutely still. "Elizabeth," Nathaniel said. "Listen to me," she said. "If I resign, if I leave the household voluntarily with a full reference under entirely ordinary circumstances, Margaret's argument collapses. There is no inappropriate relationship. There is no unstable environment. There is a governess who completed her contract and moved on. The inquiry has nothing to stand on." "You are not resigning," Nathaniel said. "You don't get to make that decision," she said. "It's my household. And Charlotte is the reason we are standing in this room, she said. Margaret is using me to get to Charlotte. If I am no longer here, she has no lever. She looked at him. Nathaniel, you know I'm right. He stood with his hands at his sides and his jaw tight, and the look of a man being asked to accept something that was both correct and entirely unacceptable. There has to be another way, he said. Tell me what it is, she said. Tell me what you do that doesn't use Charlotte as the cost of our pride. He said nothing. That's what I thought, she said. She turned to Pharaoh. I will need a full reference letter, dated and signed before I leave. I want the termination recorded as voluntary and on good terms. Can you ensure that? Pharaoh looked at Nathaniel. Don't look at him, Elizabeth said. I'm asking you. Pharaoh cleared his throat. Yes, Miss Carter, I can ensure that. Good, she said. She turned to leave. Elizabeth. Nathaniel's voice stopped her. Where will you go? She didn't turn around. I'll figure that out, she said. The debt is mine, she said. As it has always been. She opened the door. Please don't, he said. She stopped, her hand on the door frame. She stood there for a moment with her back to him. I am not leaving because I want to, she said. I am leaving because Charlotte's safety matters more than what I want. She paused. If you want to do something, fix the real problem. Take the legal threat seriously. Protect her the right way. That's what I need from you right now. She left. She told Charlotte herself. She had promised she would, and she kept her promises, and this one was the hardest she had ever had to keep. She went back to the schoolroom and sat across from Charlotte at the table and said quietly and directly what she had always said to this child, the truth. She said she was leaving. She said it was not because of anything Charlotte had done. She said it was complicated in the way that grown-up things were complicated, and that she could not explain all of it yet, but that she wanted Charlotte to hear it from her first. Charlotte listened. She sat with both hands flat on the table and listened to every word. When Elizabeth finished, Charlotte was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Is it because of Mrs. Caldwell? Partly, Elizabeth said. She wants me, Charlotte said. It wasn't a question. She thinks she does, Elizabeth said carefully. I don't want to go to her, Charlotte said. The words were very even, very controlled, the way Charlotte was controlled when she was most afraid. She doesn't know me. She doesn't know what Mama's voice sounded like. She doesn't know about the music box or the herons, or that I don't like being spoken to like I'm smaller than I am. She stopped. You know all of those things. I know, Elizabeth said. And your uncle knows them now too. He's been learning them. Charlotte looked at her. Because of you. Because he wanted to, Elizabeth said. I just stayed nearby. Charlotte pressed her lips together. Will you come back? She said. Elizabeth looked at her. I don't know, she said. I hope so. That's not the same as yes, Charlotte said. No, Elizabeth said. It isn't. Charlotte looked down at the table. Then she reached out and took Elizabeth's hand in both of hers. Small hands, still a child's hands, and held it the way she held the music box. Close. Careful. Like the holding itself was the thing. Then you have to come back, Charlotte said. Because I'm asking you to. And you said you would never make me a promise you couldn't keep, so you can't promise, but I'm asking anyway, because asking is the only thing I have left. Elizabeth pressed her free hand over Charlotte's. I know, she said. They sat like that for a long time. She packed that evening. 4 dresses, her father's books. The reference letter Pharaoh had prepared, signed by Nathaniel in handwriting, that was steady and careful, and said everything right and nothing true, because the truth was not what a reference letter was for. She found the music box on the windowsill of Charlotte's room, and wound it before she left quietly in the dark, while Charlotte slept, and set it back precisely where it had been. Nathaniel was in the hall when she came downstairs. She had not expected him to be there. She had thought, perhaps hoped in the complicated way that hope worked, that he would be in his study with the door closed, which would have been easier for both of them. He was standing at the bottom of the stairs with his hands at his sides, and the look of a man who had stood in that spot for a while. She stopped 3 steps from the bottom, "I've arranged transport," he said. "Pharaoh's organized it. The wagon will take you wherever you need to go." "Thank you," she said. "Richmond," he said. She looked at him. "To start," she said. He nodded. He looked at her trunk. He looked at her. "I spoke to Pharaoh about the legal matter," he said. "We're engaging an attorney in Richmond. The claim is weak, and we intend to demonstrate that thoroughly. Charlotte is not going anywhere." "Good," she said. "I want you to know that," he said. "Whatever happens, Charlotte is safe. I will make sure of it." She believed him. She believed him because he was no longer the man who had stood at his dinner table and told her she was nothing. How was the man who had learned the French word for autumn and sat through 3 renditions of a simple piano piece and come to a kitchen before sunrise to say he was sorry? "I know you will," she said. He took 1 step forward. He reached into his coat pocket. He held out a folded piece of paper. "Don't open it now," he said. "Wait until you've gone a ways down the road." She took it. Their fingers touched for a moment briefly, just a moment, and then she had the paper in her hand, and he had stepped back, and they were standing in the entry hall of Whitmore Estate at 6 in the morning, with everything that had happened between them hanging in the air like something just said. "Elizabeth," he said. "Don't," she said, quietly. "If you say it now, I won't be able to go." He was quiet. She came down the last 3 steps. She walked to the door. She put her hand on it. "Nathaniel," she said without turning. "Learn to sit on the floor with her sometimes. Just sit there. She doesn't need you to fix everything. She just needs you to be on the same level." "I will," he said. She opened the door. She walked out. The wagon was waiting. The Virginia morning was coming up blue and quiet and enormous. She put her trunk in the back and climbed up beside the driver, and she did not look at the house. She held the folded paper in her lap. 3 miles down the road, when the estate was behind the trees and out of sight, she opened it. It was not a letter. It was a receipt. A legal receipt dated that morning from a creditor in Richmond. Paid in full, $382. Account settled. Signed N. Whitmore. She stared at it. She sat with it in her lap for a long time while the wagon moved and Virginia went on around her. Then she folded it carefully. She pressed her hand flat over it. She looked at the road ahead. She thought, "You impossible, stubborn, infuriating man." She thought you did it anyway. She thought about what her mother had said, that the heart was not the problem. That the heart almost never was. That it was the head that made decisions and then asked the heart to live with them. She thought about a man standing at the bottom of a staircase in the early morning who had known she would refuse money from him and who had therefore paid her debt without asking, so that when she arrived in Richmond, she would arrive free. Not because he was fixing her, because he was setting her loose. She pressed her hand over the receipt. She breathed. She looked at the road. She was not done yet. Not by a long way. Richmond was not Philadelphia. Elizabeth had known this before she arrived, and arriving confirmed it in every particular. It was a city she had grown up in, and left and returned to and left again. And it had the specific quality of places that had witnessed your worst years, familiar in a way that was more weight than comfort, full of streets that remembered things you'd rather they didn't. She took a room with a widow named Mrs. Farley on the east side of the city, a clean and quiet household with 2 other boarders, a schoolteacher from Fredericksburg, and a seamstress who worked for one of the dress shops on the main street. The room was narrow, and the window faced a courtyard, and it was nothing like Whitmore Estate, and she told herself this was exactly what she needed. She told herself this every morning for 11 days. She was very convincing. She found work quickly, which was the one thing about Richmond that cooperated. The Hargrove reference was still good, and the Whitmore reference, Pharaoh's careful signed document, carried the weight of the largest estate in Virginia behind it. Within a week, she had a position tutoring 2 daughters of a merchant family on the north side 3 mornings a week at a wage that was respectable without being remarkable. She settled the Richmond debt on the 3rd day. She walked into the creditor's office with the receipt Nathaniel had sent and her own remaining savings, and she settled the final balance herself, because the receipt had covered the principal and her savings covered the interest, and she was not going to let this stand as something he had done for her that she had not completed herself. The creditor shook her hand, and she walked out of his office into the August heat, and she stood on the street, and she was free. It felt like it should feel larger. It felt like standing in a room after the furniture has been moved right, but unfamiliar with too much space where something used to be. She wrote to Mrs. Alcott in Philadelphia that evening. She wrote that she was grateful for the offer, that she had given it serious consideration, and that she was declining. She did not explain why. She thanked her for the courtesy of the inquiry and wished the school well. She sealed the letter and posted it before she could read it again. Then she went back to her room and sat on the edge of the narrow bed and listened to the city outside and thought about what she had just done. She had declined a safe life. She had declined it deliberately, with full knowledge of what it was, and she had done it because something in her had already made the decision. The real one, the underneath one, before she was fully ready to admit it. She had made it when she put the Philadelphia letter face down in the drawer. She had made it when she wrote to Richmond instead of to Mrs. Alcott. She had made it on the wagon road when she opened a receipt and understood that a man had paid a debt not to purchase her, but to set her free. You did not set free something you intended to keep. She sat with this for a long time. Then she picked up a fresh piece of paper and started to think about what came next. What came next arrived ahead of schedule. On the 12th day, a letter came to Mrs. Farley's house addressed to Miss Elizabeth Carter, in handwriting she did not recognize. It was from Charlotte, not dictated, not composed by an adult, and signed by a child. Written by Charlotte herself, in the careful, deliberate hand of a girl who had been practicing her letters for months and wanted to show it. It read, "Dear Miss Carter, I am writing to you myself because I did not want Uncle Nathaniel to know what I was saying, and I thought you would like to know I am well. I am practicing the piano every day. I learned the second piece on my own mostly. Uncle Nathaniel sits with me sometimes and watches. He does not know the music, but he sits there anyway, which I think you would say is the important part. I asked Mrs. Booth where you were, and she said, Richmond, and I asked her to help me with the address, and she said she would not tell Uncle Nathaniel, and I believe her. I am not going to Mrs. Caldwell. The attorney said so. I thought you should know, because you left partly because of that, and I want you to know it worked. You were right. Please write back if you can. Your friend who misses you very much, Charlotte Whitmore. P.S. I wound the music box this morning. I always do. Elizabeth read it 3 times. Then she pressed it against her chest and sat very still for a long time. She thought about a child who had learned the second piano piece on her own and had not told anyone she was going to try. She thought about Nathaniel sitting beside the piano, not knowing the music, but sitting there anyway. She thought about Mrs. Booth helping a child find an address and keeping it from the one person in the house who most needed to know. She picked up her pen. She wrote back the same afternoon. She wrote, Dear Charlotte, I am very proud of you for writing to me yourself. I always knew you could. Tell me about the second piece. Which one did you choose? I have been thinking about the herons. I wonder if the third nest is still there. Take care of Bramble. Take care of yourself. Take care of your uncle even when he makes it difficult. He is learning. Your friend who misses you just as much, Elizabeth Carter. P.S. Good. Keep winding it. She posted it on her way to the morning lesson. She told herself the correspondence was for Charlotte's sake. She was not entirely lying. The legal matter resolved on a Thursday 3 weeks after she'd left. She did not hear it from Nathaniel. She heard it from the seamstress at Mrs. Farley's, who had heard it from a client who had heard it from someone in the Richmond court circle, that the Caldwell guardianship claim against Whitmore had been dismissed on the grounds of insufficient cause, and that the attorney for the Whitmore estate had presented a rather thorough account of the household's stability, the child's welfare, and the governess's voluntary and amicable departure. Amicable. She thought about that word for a while. She thought about Nathaniel in his dinner clothes, standing in a servant's hallway. She thought about the kitchen before sunrise. She thought about 2 people in a small library reading books by lamplight, until the evening went full dark outside, and one of them saying Elizabeth like it was a thing he'd been waiting to say for months. She thought amicable is a strange word for any of this. She wrote a short note to Pharaoh, not to Nathaniel, to Pharaoh, thanking him for the work on the reference and asking as professionally as she could manage whether he might confirm that the matter was fully resolved. Farrow wrote back within the week. The claim was dismissed. Charlotte was safe. The household was stable. He added one line at the end, in his careful estate manager's hand. Mr. Whitmore asks me to convey that he hopes you are well, Miss Carter, and that he remains, as he put it, in your debt. I note for the record that the phrase appeared to mean something other than its financial definition. She put that letter in the drawer, too. The drawer was getting full. September came and went without Philadelphia. She noticed this. She noticed it the way you notice a door you chose not to walk through, with a clarity that was neither regret nor relief, but something that sat precisely between them. She was fine in Richmond. She was doing well by every measure that mattered. The merchants' daughters were making good progress. Mrs. Farley's was comfortable. She had rebuilt the thin margins of her life into something slightly less thin, and she was building it on her own terms, which had always been the point. She was fine. She thought about Charlotte every day. She thought about Nathaniel in the spaces between thoughts, which was more often than every day, and which she was not going to examine too closely. His first letter came on the 14th of September. Not through Farrow. In his own hand on plain paper with no estate seal. It read, Elizabeth. Charlotte has learned the second piano piece and is beginning to harass me about the third. She beats me at chess now, which I'm told is your fault. I have been to the creek. There are still 3 heron nests. I looked, which I am given to understand is the important part. I have also, for what it is worth, been sitting on the floor. It is uncomfortable, and I recommend it to no one, and Charlotte appears to find it reassuring, so I intend to continue. I am writing because I said I would do this right, and I have not yet done enough that could be called right. I am not asking you to return. I am writing because you should know that the things you changed here did not leave when you did. They stayed. I stayed. Whatever that is worth to you, it is true. Nathaniel. She read it twice. Then she put it in the drawer. Then she took it out again and read it a third time. She thought about a man sitting on a hardwood floor because an 8-year-old found it reassuring. She thought about him going to the creek and looking at the herons and coming back with something to report. She thought about him writing a letter in plain handwriting on plain paper because doing things right meant not hiding behind the estate seal. She wrote back 3 days later. She wrote Nathaniel. Charlotte told me about the second piece before you did, which means she is quicker and you should watch your correspondence. Tell her to start with the third piece, slowly. She will want to rush it, and she will lose the timing. The herons migrate south in October. If she wants to see them before they go soon. The floor is not supposed to be comfortable. That is the point of it. I am well. I am thinking. Elizabeth. She posted it. She sat in her narrow room and thought. She thought for 6 days, during which 2 more letters came, one from Charlotte about the third piano piece, and one from Nathaniel about the herons, which he reported seeing on a cold Tuesday morning. 3 of them standing in the shallows of the creek, like they had always been there, which in fact they had. On the 7th day, she stopped thinking and started packing. She arrived at Whitmore Estate on a Wednesday morning in October, unannounced, on a hired wagon with her trunk and her father's books, and the drawer full of letters and the music box receipt that she had carried next to her heart for 6 weeks. She had not written to say she was coming. She had not written because she did not know, until she was on the road, whether she would go through with it, and she did not want to set an expectation she might fail to meet. She met the expectation. The wagon came up the drive, and she climbed down, and she was standing in front of Whitmore Estate in the October morning when the front door opened. It was Charlotte. Charlotte, who had apparently been watching from the window, because that was what Charlotte did. She watched, and she noticed, and she missed nothing. Came out of the front door and across the drive in her good dress, at a pace that was technically not running, but contained all the urgency of running, and she stopped 2 feet from Elizabeth and looked at her with those gray eyes and said, "You came back." "I came back," Elizabeth said. Charlotte reached out and took her hand. Not the careful, preserved hold of a child managing her feelings. A real hold. Both hands tight, the kind of hold that said, "I have been waiting, and I am not letting go." "I learned the third piece," Charlotte said. "I heard," Elizabeth said. "Will you play it for me?" "Yes," Charlotte said. "But first," she tugged her hand, Come inside. He doesn't know you're here. I know, Elizabeth said. He's going to be... Charlotte searched for the word. I know, Elizabeth said again. Charlotte looked at her for a moment, with the full, clear attention that never missed anything. Are you staying? She said. Elizabeth looked at this child, this remarkable, precise, heartbroken, and healing child, who wound a music box every morning and had written her own letter and had learned the third piano piece without being asked. Yes, she said. If things go as I hope. They will, Charlotte said with absolute certainty. How do you know? Because, Charlotte said, pulling her toward the door. He's been terrible company for 6 weeks, and Mrs. Booth says he needs to be fixed, and I think you're the only one who knows how. Elizabeth almost laughed. I am not fixing him, she said. He's not a music box. No, Charlotte agreed. He's harder. She found him in the small library. Of course she did. She had known she would in the same way she had known most things about him by now. Not because he was simple, but because she had paid attention. She knocked. He said, Come in. She came in. Howe was at the desk, with his accounts. Still always the accounts. The man could not resist an account book, and he looked up, and the pen stopped moving, and he went very still in the way that he went still when something had happened that he had not prepared for. She closed the door. She stood in front of his desk. He set the pen down. Elizabeth, he said. I came back, she said. I need to say some things, and I need you to let me say all of them before you respond. Can you do that? He looked at her for a moment. Yes, he said. She took a breath. I left because it was the right thing to do, she said. For Charlotte, for the legal situation, for the household. I do not regret it. I want you to understand that I made that decision clearly, and I stand by it. He nodded. He was listening the way he listened when something mattered. I declined the Philadelphia position, she said. Something moved in his face. I declined it because I had already made a decision I hadn't admitted to yet, she said. Not because I had no options, because I had chosen one. I want you to be clear about the order of that. I was not without a path. I chose this one. I understand, he said. Good, she said. Because the next thing I need to say is conditional on that being true. She looked at him steadily. You paid my debt. Yes, he said. Without asking. You would have said no. I did say no, she said. And you did it anyway. He looked at her. Elizabeth, I'm not angry, she said. I want you to understand why I'm not angry, because I should be by every reasonable standard I have ever applied to my own life. She paused. I'm not angry because you did it to set me free, not to own me, not to make me owe you, to set me free. And the only reason I know that is because you did it in a way I couldn't argue with, and couldn't refuse and couldn't use as a reason to stay, or a reason to go. You just removed the obstacle and stepped back. I was very still. That is the most honest thing anyone has done for me, she said, in a very long time. Elizabeth, he said, and his voice had the quality it had in the small library on the Thursday evening, the open, unguarded quality of a man who had run out of walls. I'm not finished, she said. He closed his mouth. I came back, she said, because Charlotte asked me to, and because I could not stay away, and because the life I was building in Richmond was correct and sensible and entirely insufficient. She held his gaze. I came back because you sat on the floor, because you went to the creek and looked at the herons, because you wrote me a letter on plain paper without the estate seal, and reported very seriously that you had been to the creek and looked, and you understood now that the looking was the important part. She stopped. You changed. Not for me. For yourself and for Charlotte, and because you are a better man than the one you were when I arrived, and you know it, and you're not going back. He stood up. No, he said. I'm not. Then I need to know, she said, whether what you said in this room, what you said about doing this right, about finding an equitable way, whether that was a thing you said in a moment or a thing you meant. He came around the desk. He stopped in front of her. Howe was close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his face, 6 weeks of it, and underneath the exhaustion, Something that had not been there when she arrived at this estate in February. Something that looked like a man who had learned what he was made of and had decided to be accountable to it. "I meant it," he said. "Every word. And I have spent 6 weeks working out how." "Tell me," she said. He told her. He told her about the conversation with his attorney. Not Caldwell's attorney, his own, a man in Charlottesville he trusted. He told her about the discussion he'd had carefully and with full legal weight about what a proper and public arrangement between them would require and what it would protect. He told her about the letter he'd sent to the Preston family and the Beaumonts, not explaining, not defending, but establishing clearly and without apology that the household of Whitmore Estate was under his management and its affairs were his to determine. He told her about Charlotte's second piano piece and the third and the floor. He told her that he had been to the Beaumont supper and the Preston dinner and had conducted himself in every social situation as a man who had nothing to hide and nothing to apologize for, and that the world, which moved slower than either of them would like, but which moved, had largely decided to follow his lead because he was Nathaniel Whitmore, and his lead was the one Virginia followed, whether it wanted to or not. He told her he had talked to Charlotte. He told her what Charlotte had said. Elizabeth said, "What did she say?" He said, "She said that you were the best teacher she'd ever had, and that I was a slow learner, and that she intended to outlast both our stubbornness, because she had gotten very good at waiting, and she was not going to stop now." Elizabeth pressed her hand over her mouth. "She's 8 years old," she said. "She's extraordinary," Nathaniel said. "You made her that." "She was already that," Elizabeth said. "I just stayed nearby." "You keep saying that," he said. "That you just stayed nearby, that you just kept company, that the credit belongs to everyone else." He looked at her. "You're wrong. You know you're wrong." She looked at him. "The credit is yours," he said. "For Charlotte and for what happened to me. Whatever I am now that I wasn't in February, you did that. Not by managing me, not by teaching me, not by being patient with me in the way that people are patient with people they're managing. By being honest. By leaving. When leaving was the right thing. By coming back when. I came back for myself too," she said. "I want that on the record." Something that was fully entirely a smile crossed his face. "Good," he said. "I want you to have come back for yourself. I was hoping you had." She looked at him. He looked at her. "Elizabeth Carter," he said. "I know what I'm asking. I know what it costs you, and I know what it will continue to cost you in ways I won't ever fully share equally. I know the world has rules, and I know they fall harder on you. I am not asking you to pretend otherwise." He paused. "I'm asking you with your eyes open and your options intact and your debt settled and your path clear, whether you will let me try to deserve you. Not because you need me to, because I need to. Because becoming the kind of man who deserves a woman like you is the most worthwhile thing I have ever attempted, and I don't want to stop." The library was very quiet. Outside, October was going on in Virginia, the creek and the willows, and 3 heron nests that would soon be empty for the winter. And somewhere in the house, a music box sitting on a windowsill wound and ready for morning. Elizabeth looked at this man. She thought about her father, who had been a legal man with a kind heart and a poor head for money, and who had told her once when she was 17 and full of theories about how the world should work, that the bravest thing a person could do was choose something knowing exactly what it cost and pay the price without flinching. She had been paying prices her whole life without flinching. She was not afraid of the cost. She was afraid of wanting something this much and losing it. But she had also learned in a year that had rearranged everything she thought she knew about herself that afraid and wrong were not the same thing. That sometimes the thing you were most afraid to want was the thing that was most entirely yours. She reached into her coat pocket. She took out the receipt. The paid-in-full receipt, $382, signed N. Whitmore, that she had carried next to her heart for 6 weeks. She held it out to him. He looked at it. "I don't want your money back," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm not giving it back. I'm giving it to you because I want you to have it. Because you did something with it that no one has ever done for me. You used it to free me, not to keep me. And I want you to know that I understand the difference, and that it matters, and that it is one of the reasons I am standing in this room right now." He took it. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his own coat pocket close to his chest, exactly where she had kept it. "Stay," he said. "Not as the governess, as yourself. However we have to arrange it, whatever the world requires of us, to make it proper stay." She looked at him. "Yes," she said. One word. Clean and clear and entirely hers. He reached out and took her hand. Not the careful, managed gesture of a man performing feeling, but the real thing, the hand of a man who had learned the difference between holding on and holding tight, and knew which one she needed. She let him. Charlotte was waiting in the hallway when they came out. She was sitting on the bottom stair with Bramble beside her, and her hands folded in her lap, and the expression of a child who had been there for a while, and intended to stay until she had the information she required. She looked at them. She looked at their hands. She looked back up at their faces. "Well," she said. "Well," Elizabeth said. Charlotte looked at Nathaniel. "Did you do it right?" she said. He looked at Elizabeth. "Ask her," he said. Charlotte looked at Elizabeth. Elizabeth looked at this child, this 8-year-old who had wound a broken music box for 4 months, and written her own letter, and learned the third piano piece alone, and sat on a stair with a dog, and waited with the patience of someone who had decided that the people she loved were worth waiting for. "Yes," Elizabeth said. "He did it right." Charlotte stood up. She walked to Elizabeth and put both arms around her waist and held on. Elizabeth put her arms around her and held on back. Over Charlotte's head she looked at Nathaniel. I was looking at them both with the expression she had first seen on him standing outside a door in the dark of a corridor. The expression of a man who had not known how to open a door for so long, that the opening when it finally came was almost too much to hold. Almost. He held it. He walked to them and put his hand on Charlotte's back gently, and the three of them stood in the entry hall of Whitmore Estate in the October morning. And it was not perfect. It would never be perfectly simple, the world being what it was, and the road ahead being what it was. But it was real, and it was chosen, and it was theirs. Charlotte pulled back enough to look up at Elizabeth. "I told you they would go well," she said. "You did," Elizabeth said. "I'm usually right," Charlotte said. "I know," Elizabeth said. "It's one of my favorite things about you." Charlotte considered this. Then she said with complete certainty, "Play me the third piece later." "Tonight," Elizabeth said. "After supper." Charlotte nodded once satisfied and took Bramble back toward the kitchen because she was 8 years old and she had gotten what she came for, and there was a dog who needed feeding. Nathaniel watched her go. Then he looked at Elizabeth. "Thank you," he said, "for coming back." "I came back for myself," she said. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm thanking you." She looked at him. This impossible slow-learning floor, sitting heron-finding receipt, paying plain paper writing man who had spent 6 weeks becoming someone worth coming back to. She thought, this is what it looks like when a person earns something. She thought, this is what it looks like when you choose from strength. She thought, this is mine. Elizabeth Carter had arrived at Whitmore Estate with a trunk and $12 and a letter of recommendation, and a debt she intended to pay, and a heart she intended to protect. She had paid the debt. She had come back for everything else. And in the October light of a Virginia morning with a music box wound upstairs, and a child in the kitchen, and a man beside her who had learned finally and entirely what it meant to be on the same level as the people he loved. She was exactly where she had chosen to be. Not because she had to be, because she had decided. And Elizabeth Carter, who had always been the most practical woman in any room she entered, had decided that this, all of this, every complicated and costly and entirely real piece of it was worth every price she had ever paid to get here. She was home. Not because it was his house, because